Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where you here at MMA Junkie. We take a spin through the biggest topics in the sport. This week, we've got Matthew Wells, Mike Bond, and Goes Garcia. So let's just jump right into it, fellas. Guys, Katlyn Chookagian took a huge step forward with his UFC on ESPN 32 win over Giga Chikadze, looking sensational after taking a year away from competition to rebound from a devastating loss to Max Holloway. Now, after such an impressive win, I'm wondering, what is the ceiling for Katlyn Chookagian? Does it change where we think he stands? Is this someone who needs to be in discussions for upcoming title shots? Or does it maybe just turn out that Giga Chikadze wasn't quite ready for this level of opponent just yet? When you look at this fight, what's the biggest takeaway from it? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Matt, you get us started.
Well, I mean, first off, hell of a way to rebound from that loss to Max Holloway for Chookagian. He looked fantastic. It was almost like a mirror image of the fight that he was in that fight with Holloway. For me, though, the bigger takeaway was I don't think Giga is quite ready for the top five, that title range in this featherweight division. There were a couple of times early in the fight where he just kind of let his offense get the better of him. And I mean, he was just like going crazy with combinations. He swept himself off of his feet a couple of times, like when he was just unleashing these furious combos. He kind of got a little wild, a little bit out of control. I'm a big believer in you win or you learn. And I think he's going to learn a lot of things from this fight. This is his first loss in the UFC. It was one of those things where it was like, okay, I can go back to the drawing board and really pick up a lot of things from this loss. I think he's right there. I think his next performance will tell us a lot about where he belongs in the division. I still think he can compete with the top five in this division for sure. But he just needs to go back to the drawing board a little bit, tweak a few things, tweak his approach. He was still competitive even late in this fight, but it was still clear that Katlyn Chookagian was running away with it. So just go back to the training room, tweak up a few things here and there, and he'll be right in that mix. But yeah, he's got some things to work on, man. More so, the biggest takeaway for me is just calm down a little bit. We know you're an explosive fighter, but stay a little bit more in control, and you'll be just fine against those top guys.
Yeah, I mean, unless your name's Khabib Nurmagomedov, you don't make it through the UFC undefeated, right? So you pick up those lessons. So, Mike, what do you think? Is it just about what Giga Chikadze can learn, or do we learn something new about Katlyn Chookagian as well?
I mean, I think we learned a lot about Katlyn Chookagian's heart, his resiliency, the fact that he has a good team with great people around him and that they did the right things to keep him away from competition after a really bad loss to Max Holloway. Hopefully Giga's team can kind of take away those same lessons in terms of his comeback here. But I do think Katlyn Chookagian is a legitimate top five featherweight. He's very, very good. But I think what this fight really showed us is that there is a clear elite platinum tier in the featherweight division. And that's where Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway sit. I think everyone else is a tick or two below those guys and have some work to do if they not only want to find themselves in fights against them, but actually have a chance at winning. So that's something it showed to me. Yes, I absolutely think Katlyn Chookagian could fight for a title one day. I think he's probably honestly only one good win against like Brian Ortega or Yair Rodriguez away from getting that opportunity. But is he good enough to win it when he gets there against a Max and a rematch or a Volkanovski? That's what I'm not quite sure of. So this fight, I think, obviously, was great for him, a great way to get back on track. But to me, it didn't have Katlyn Chookagian as good as he looked standing out to be like, this is the guy who's going to dethrone Volkanovski, who's yet to be beaten in the UFC. Things like that. It just shows the depth of this featherweight division. But to me, there's that clear established tier above where Holloway and Volkanovski are.
It's interesting. I guess if that's a scenario, then you almost throw the result out against Max Holloway, right? I was a little bit concerned of where he stood in the division. Goes, what do you think? Is he a title contender in the near future?
Yeah, this is someone that we definitely need to talk about for sure. As far as title contention, I think he's still a little bit of ways just because it's hard to get the memory of the Max Holloway fight out, which is weird because I feel like Holloway is kind of his kryptonite. Like, I actually think he'd match up better against Volkanovski. So we got to see what happens at the top. But as Mike said, like, props to his team, for doing this for his fighter, putting him away for a year. That's a year that his coaching staff doesn't get a paycheck as well. So they all sacrificed for this win. They did some good things. Katlyn Chookagian did some good things that night, but I do feel like if he would have stuck to the wrestling a little bit more, maybe he wouldn't have been so damaged at the end of the fight. I think that's a lesson that he can maybe learn moving forward. And as far as Giga goes, he's in the same spot that Katlyn Chookagian was a year ago. He's got to go back and he's got to sharpen some of them tools if he wants to be in the same conversation as the other guys.
Yeah, if you're Giga Chikadze, maybe just kind of use that as your inspiration, right? I mean, look what he did against you and what he did against Max Holloway. I mean, that's certainly a great rebound for Calvin Kattar. So, man, for a guy that I won't say I wrote off, but I was a little bit scared after that Max Holloway fight, man. He looked absolutely sensational. So, as you said, he's going to be up there at the top of the division for sure. Hey, guys, an interesting storyline that emerged out of UFC on ESPN 32 involved Katlyn Chookagian as well, who revealed that she fought out her contract with the UFC declining to give her a new deal before the event. Now, that brings up some very real questions about her future. I mean, it's absolutely undeniable that she's one of the best women's flyweights in the world, but even she admits that the public isn't clamoring for her to get a rematch with Valentina Shevchenko. So is this a situation where the UFC might simply let her walk away in favor of developing some new contenders? And if so, is that the right way for the UFC to proceed? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Mike, talk it out.
No, I don't think it's the right way. I mean, I know we're getting further and further away from this, but the UFC is, supposed to be the place where all the best fighters in the world compete. And it doesn't matter how these matchups play out. That's ultimately the pecking order you establish as who are the best, because the best are fighting the best. We were in this situation once before at women's flyweight with Liz Carmouche, who had a abomination of a title fight with Valentina Shevchenko in their rematch, but she was still beating everyone else, and they ultimately parted ways with her. I know the nature of her release and everything was a little bit different. She was on like the promotional tour for the UFC and all that. It was just different circumstances. Chookagian fighting out her contract here, but to me, you need to keep these fighters around. I know the idea of having, the person in a Joseph Benavidez type situation isn't the greatest thing for the division, but if she's winning these fights, you need to find a way as, matchmakers, as UFC brass, to be more creative and figuring out a way to make it work. Like whether it's, Chookagian saying she's willing to fight down in the rankings, anyone 1 to 15, maybe you put her somewhere on the lower tier. It's not like she, needs to knock off every potential contender. How many times have we seen in other divisions where the champion fights number 5 who never has had a top 5 win or things like that? So there's a lot of good ways to go. Just the excuse of being like, hey, she's beating everyone else and no one wants to see another title fight with Shevchenko isn't good enough for me. She is clearly the number 2 fighter in that division, and you have to keep her around. So I would implore the UFC to re-sign Katlyn Chookagian. I think she is important. If you don't want her at 125, tell her to move back up to 135. There's ways that you can make this work without just kicking her to the curb because she's too good to her own fault.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the matchmaker's job is obviously to develop fresh contenders, right? To develop fights that people want to see for the champion. But she's so talented. I hate to watch her just walk away. Goes, what do you think? Is it actually the right move to let her leave, or is that would be a mistake?
I would understand why the UFC would do it, but I don't know that you could say the things you say if you did something like that. It wouldn't be a good look for the company, for the sport. It wouldn't be a good message to send to all the other fighters, right? I mean, Katlyn's doing everything she can. She's getting wins. That's the most important thing. That's what you have to do if you're a fighter. If you keep amounting wins and you get let go, that's a terrible message to send. So I think, like Mike said, if you want to lay claim to having the best fighters in the world, then you have to keep that intact. On the UFC side, that's just not a message that you want to send. On Katlyn's side, though, I will say this: maybe she could do a little bit more. There have been fighters like Gegard Mousasi, Beneil Dariush, who kind of have embraced a little bit the dark side, but still kind of maintaining their integrity, saying a couple things, doing a couple things, getting out in the media a little bit more. I think she could maybe do a little bit more. Bend, but don't break. But as far as letting her go, I think that would be a really bad move for the UFC.
Yeah, and let it be said, by the way, I thought that was actually a pretty entertaining fight the other night. I thought Katlyn Chookagian did a good job, but, listen, maybe she wants to look elsewhere. Bellator's women's flyweight division isn't bad. There's some fights there available, so maybe it behooves her to look around a little bit. I don't know. Matt, what do you make of this situation?
Yeah, it's one of those things, man, where we've seen, like in the past with the UFC, if the costs and the championship potential don't line up, they will show you the door. I mean, that's just the way that they operate these days, regardless of how dominant you may be, how many wins you may have. If you're not going out there and, putting on spectacular performances, I mean, yeah, she's getting wins, but she's not finishing people. And that's one of the things that I would have liked to see after that Valentina Shevchenko fight. Yeah, we know you can win, but after you lose to the champion in the manner that you did, can you come back out there, make some adjustments, and start finishing people? That part has not happened yet. Yeah, she's getting wins, but it's still the same Katlyn Chookagian we've seen before. Very, very crisp and clean technique striking wise. I mean, that's really the only thing she has going for her. These wins are mostly coming up by stand-up striking. I mean, if she was getting these wins by grappling, yeah, there wouldn't be much of a question here. But the fact that she is a striker I think that's really the only reason we're having this conversation right now.
It's such a shame, man, because I would totally understand the business move. If the UFC doesn't re-sign her, I understand their logic behind it, but she's such a talented fighter. I just hate to see it happen. I'd hate to see her not get rewarded for what she's doing, especially when you, like you said, Mike, she said, I'll fight anybody in the division. Before the fight, she said, give me anybody. Those are the type of fighters you're looking for. So I'm going to be really interested to see how this contract situation plays out over the next couple weeks. But guys, outside the cage, Henry Cejudo is keeping his name in the headlines, claiming he would basically beat any of the UFC's lighter weight champions. It doesn't even matter what division. While he's also expressing some frustration that the promotion isn't willing to pay him what he needs to come back. So UFC President Dana White said this conversation is just downright silly. So I wonder, what's your take here? I mean, is Cejudo being serious about a comeback, or is he just kind of stirring the pot the way he likes to do? And is the UFC making a mistake by not breaking out the checkbook to ensure the return of Triple C? What's going on here with all this chaos? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Break it down.
Well, we spoke to Cejudo last week. He had a lot to say, but it only took him a few minutes to convince me why I want to see him come back. I mean, he's an Olympic gold medalist. He's a two-time division champion. If people aren't buying his pay-per-views, when you add in his persona, his accomplishments, I have to think that at this point, it's on the UFC to promote him better, because this guy does a lot on his own. That's very easy. That's a easy package for me to present to people. I think people would be interested. He's talking a lot of smack, man. Now, look, Dana White's counter argument, look, I get it, but I think it should be limited to just he wants too much money, and that's it. Don't tell us you've never done this before because you did it for GSP, right? Don't tell us he's retired because Khabib's retired and you don't leave him alone. So, I mean, just give us the basics, Dana, but you have to open up the checkbook. You have to bring this guy back. There's tons that he could do. And I'll tell you what, if you're going to raise the pay-per-view prices on us, you better give us some fresh matchups, because this is going to be a lot of rematch this year. And this is an explosive guy that can come back and really make some waves. I think Henry Cejudo should come back. I think they should give him some good fights.
Some great points on why he should come back. It is probably important to know, by the way, he's not currently enrolled in USADA. So if he wants to come back, he's got to make the first step, I think, by getting back in the USADA testing pool. But Matt, what do you think? I mean, is this a comeback that we want to see? And gosh, he's calling out everybody: flyweight, bantamweight, featherweight. I mean, is there a spot that you think he fits in best?
I mean, any of them, to be honest with you. I mean, just look at the guy's resume. I mean, before he exited. Let's run down the names: Sergio Pettis, Demetrius Johnson, TJ Dillashaw, Marlon Moraes, Dominic Cruz. The last three of which he finished in those fights. So it doesn't matter which division he goes back into. I mean, the guy is going to be competitive, especially if he shows up with that same fire that he had before he left. I think the knock on him in terms of getting a deal done with the UFC, yeah, pay is one of those things, because he was vocal about that while he was still a champion. But the other thing is in the manner that he left. I don't think the UFC was very happy that, hey, I'm going to drop this bomb on you in my post-fight speech here after I just, had this incredible finish of Dominic Cruz. So I think he has to overcome that, rebuild that trust with the UFC, say, hey, if I come back, I'm going to be here. So those are things that have to get sorted out at the negotiation table. Whatever division he wants to come back into, I think that he will be very competitive and can make a lot of noise, if not just outright win the title, if he does come back into a title fight. So yeah, let's make it happen, UFC. I think it's on them to make sure that, Henry's happy, and Henry has to make sure that the UFC is going to be happy, whichever direction they go.
See, I think that's a great point, Matt. I wonder how much of that's playing in here too, right? Is it really just all about the money they can't get together, or is Dana and the UFC brass still a little bit upset at the way Henry Cejudo exited the door, and that's why they don't want to let him back in? Mike, what do you think? What's going on here? Are these two sides going to come together? Is this a pipe dream that we need to quit talking about? What are we doing in this situation?
I think it's a little of all of the above what these guys said. I think they hit the nail on the head. It's just a tricky one. I mean, Henry Cejudo is so damn talented, man. Like, it's a shame that he kind of went out what he did. He was really hitting his stride, looking sensational in these fights. But I understand his reasonings. This guy's been competing in athletics since he was like 5 years old, went to the Olympics, all that stuff. He admitted just recently that he was burnt out. He wanted to start a family, get a wife, all these kind of things. So his life has evolved a lot since he most recently fought. And I think he wants to come back and kind of have the second chapter, but he's not going to do it for below what he feels is his value. And this is where we ultimately hit the crossroads, because he says, I want Conor McGregor money, I want Jorge Masvidal money. We know where these guys really get paid the most. I mean, maybe he could somehow work his way into a similar base salary, but the big money for those guys comes through pay-per-view buys. And I don't think Henry Cejudo is proven to be a big pay-per-view draw by any stretch of the imagination. So that's where I think it ultimately hurts him, with him wanting these certain financial attachments and all that kind of stuff. So that's where it ultimately has to get hammered out, and he has to prove that maybe he's worth it. So if we're looking at a resolution, how this is going to be fixed, I think it likely comes down to Henry Cejudo is probably going to have to fold and, suck it up and probably come back and do a fight on his current contract, whether that would be for the bantamweight belt or a title eliminator at bantamweight, whatever it may be. And if he wins that one, then I think he gets a lot of leverage back. Maybe he gets a title shot, as Dana White said. If you can get that bantamweight belt back, then you talk about him going up to 45. So as unfortunate as it is, and I want to say Henry Cejudo, just pay the man everything he deserves right now. I think he's going to have to work for it a little bit by fighting and just having to, bite the bullet and fight on his current deal.
I think the real resolution we're going to be seeking here is for Mike Bond to respect the 4-minute clock, sir. You were well over in that one. But listen, hey, I never know how serious to take Henry Cejudo, man. He's kind of a professional troll, But if he is serious, I do hope we get to see him again, man. The guy certainly is talented. That list of opponents is incredible, and I'd love to see him in there again. So, guys, UFC's first pay-per-view event of 2022 is upon us with UFC 270 taking place this Saturday in Anaheim, and a pair of title fights top the bill. You can see the MMA Junkie staff picks to get our full predictions on the card. But I'm going to put you guys on the spot right now. If we hear Bruce Buffer screaming out the words "Ngannou," whose name comes afterward? Or do we even hear it twice? What are we going to see in these title fights? Matt, 4 minutes on the clock. Get us going.
And I hate to do this to you guys, but I'm going to have to ride the fence on this one because there's a strong possibility that Bruce Buffer may be saying "Ngannou" twice. And there's also a very strong possibility he may not say it at all. But if I had to choose, if you're actually twisting my arm and asking me to choose, I'm going to have to lean, I guess, a little bit more in the flyweight title fight, just because, I don't know. I think that's a closer matchup between the two. I mean, the heavyweight title fight is also very close. It's a tough one to pick, man. These are both coin flips for me, but it's a very strong possibility we could see two Ngannou. But I would lean Deiveson Figueiredo if I had to pick one. So there you go. If you want an answer from me.
Professional fence riding at its finest. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But I get it. I think that's what makes this so intriguing, right? That's why these fights are so exciting to us, because I really can see the possibility in both title fights of it changing hand. I can also see both guys retaining as well. And I think that's what makes this pay-per-view so interesting. Maybe it's not as loaded as some cards, maybe whatever, but I love both these title fights for sure. Mike, what do you think? Are we going to hear a 1, 2? What's the plan?
Oh, I think probably it's going to be one, but man, like as Matt kind of said, I know it's riding the fence a little bit, but John, you just laid it out perfectly. There is endless possibilities here. I mean, how can we even compare these type of things? The flyweight title fight, we have a situation the first time in UFC history where two fighters are fighting each other 3 consecutive times. I know it happened for Stipe Miocic against Daniel Cormier, but Cormier on his end had a fight with Derek Lewis in between. So not the exact same scenario there. So how does that adjust game plans? The familiarity, like it's kind of a toss up there, but I do think Deiveson Figueiredo, if he's going to be able to beat Brandon Moreno, this has to be the one. I mean, he's doing everything and more to try to prepare himself perfectly for this fight. And then on the other side of it with Ngannou and Gane, I mean, former training partners, we know all the history there. It's been kind of beaten to death in the lead up to this fight, but these guys have an intimate knowledge of each other. So we're led to believe. So how does that impact the fight? Of course, Gane undefeated, this unsolvable riddle so far. So like there's a lot of unique dynamics to these two matchups that I can't just sit here and say definitively I feel really, really confident. And of course, in the main event, when you're talking about Francis Ngannou's power, he can turn the lights off on anyone. So it's only one punch away from these things happening. So man, like sitting here right now, I'm personally in my staff picks, I picked Ngannou and Figueiredo to win, but you could give me any combination of these two fights ending a certain way, and I'd sit here right now and believe you.
Intriguing to say the least. And you laid out the storylines as well. So not only are they great fights stylistically, but they've got some real backstory behind each of them as well. Goes, are you going to ride this fence as well? Or let me put the gun to your head. I'm not going to let you ride the fence. Give us an answer.
Putting a gun to my head, I think, would be the best case scenario, John. I mean, I don't know what you're trying to do to me. We both live within 15 minutes of Moreno and Ngannou, so this might not go well for us. But the guys are right. It is a possibility. You could hear this twice. I don't think it's going to happen. But so far, 2022 has been the year of the underdog. I mean, it hasn't been around that long. But, hey, Kattar was an underdog. The 49ers were an underdog. Look what they did to the Cowboys. That's what you kind of get for making this question, both you and Matt. And, look, I wouldn't be shocked if we heard it twice, but I'm going to go with once, and I'm going to pick Davidson Figueiredo, only because of this, guys. When you look at this fight, I think it's going to be tactical. I think it's going to be a lot different from the last two fights. But the one thing that kind of stands out for me is this is Brandon Moreno as a champion. This is Brandon Moreno with a lot of new responsibilities in his life, a lot of media, right? A lot of interviews, not just in English, but in Spanish as well. Don't forget about how much they call for him in Mexico and the things he has to do over there. It's a lot, guys. Not to mention this fight's going to be in Anaheim. Anaheim's not that far away from Tijuana. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on this guy, and I think maybe that might get to him. So if I had to pick one, it would be that one.
Well, because Goes took a shot at the Dallas Cowboys, and because I'm not sure if Francis Ngannou's actually left Las Vegas yet, I'm not going to give an answer. How about that? The primary focus of UFC 270 will certainly sit around the two title fights at the top of the card, but give us something else to watch this weekend. I mean, what's the fight or the storyline that's most catching your eye outside of those two big title fights up at the top? We'll put 4 minutes on the clock. Mike, you get us started.
Michel Pereira, man. I mean, we know this guy is action anytime he gets in there, but it's been an interesting time for him. I mean, I know he came into the UFC and he was fighting a little crazy, a little too crazy, and it cost him some wins and some fights where he was, a pretty big favorite. But since the pandemic has come around, this guy has become a lot more disciplined in his approach, and he's kind of, shucked away all the antics, the crazy entrances. He does a little bit of the fun stuff in the cage still, but it hasn't fully been the guy that we've come to know. And he has said that's been for a specific reason. He does all that stuff for the benefit of the fans. He wants to be an entertainer first. And with no fans in these arenas at the UFC Apex, he hasn't felt the need to bust that out. But in the Honda Center in Anaheim, we are going to have what we are led to believe is a near sold out crowd, and the energy is going to be there. He's fighting on the pay-per-view main card, setting the table for 2 championship fights. I think we're going to get back to the Michel Pereira of old, and whether that's going to be to his downfall because he's going to do something too crazy and cost himself a win, or if it's going to be absolutely amazing and give us some electric highlight reel moment to set up the main event, it's going to be fun. So I expect great things from Michel Pereira in a win or a loss on Saturday night.
Definitely something to follow along with. I mean, the guy is such a showman, even if it's to his detriment sometimes. I never know which way I want him to go because I want to be entertained, but you want the guy to have the best career possible too. So, Goes, what do you think? What are you going to be paying attention to this weekend?
I actually like that Stamen Nurmagomedov fight. I think both fighters are very well-rounded, and I think it's going to be a really fun fight because Cody Stamen doesn't really know how to deliver a boring fight. I mean, you put him in front of fans that are going to be cheering him on, motivating both guys. I think this fight's going to be a scrapper. And neither guy really claims a stake as far as like title picture or anything like that, but it's not always about that. Sometimes you just have to have that fight that is going to be a scrap. And I think this is going to be one. Whether it's on the feet or whether it's on the ground, I think both guys are pretty versatile. So I think the beginning and the end of each round is going to be very exciting. It's going to be that cartoon fight where we get that cloud and just a bunch of feet and fists flying around everywhere. But that's my fight. But as far as storylines go, John, that you mentioned, is Tyson Fury going to be watching this fight? Because he's kind of got a little bit of a stake in this night. What happens if Francis Ngannou wins? Could that maybe go into the direction of boxing that could lead us down so many rabbit holes, guys? The UFC brass, they're going to have their work cut out in front of them. We'll have to see what's going to happen with that. But I think that's a very interesting storyline moving forward.
Yeah, that's a great fight with Nurmagomedov and Stamen. And you're right, man. Tyson Fury, was he going to be tweeting along, live tweeting the pay-per-view? I mean, what's happening there? We'll see. Matt, what about you? What are you going to be paying attention to?
Well, I'm going to stay with the featherweight division, man, because, we just came off that incredible featherweight main event. So let's stay in that division. I like Ilia Topuria to go out there and show us some more of what he's been doing. 2 back-to-back first-round finishes. This guy's undefeated in the UFC so far. He looks very much like a future contender. I'm big on this guy, man. He goes out there, just gets the job done. He dresses like, that your favorite action movie villain. The guy just looks the part and he gets the job done. I mean, he's a young guy as well. He's 24 years old, so he's got a lot of time ahead of him. But man, I am really impressed what he's been doing. And he's fighting Charles Jourdain, who's known to get some finishes in the UFC too. So I think that could be a banger early on in the card, outside of obviously the very, very top heavy end with the title fights. So that's one I'm looking forward to. If you're looking for a potential fight of the night, that could steal the show right there, I think that's going to be the one for me.
Great shout. I'm glad they were able to keep him on the card as well, man, because that is a great win. And listen, as you said, I think, look, there is some depth here. I know maybe not the big, superstars. Maybe some people are a little critical, but I mean, you look at like Rodolfo Vieira coming back. I think he's an intriguing name, even though he had some setbacks. Leone Barcelos is a guy that I'm still very high on as well. So, I mean, there's some names out here to pay attention to. I'm just going to knock on wood right now and just say, please, Omicron, leave us alone. We need our pay-per-view. It's our first one of 2022. Let us enjoy it, please. Listen, that's certainly the big story. Of course, we had a couple weeks off from the big MMA events, but the UFC is back in full swing. The other organizations are getting their calendar years underway as well. So it's going to get busy again, and we'll talk about everything that happens on Spinning Back Clique.